What is up, everyone? Happy Wednesday to you. Hope you guys are having a great day, a great week. Welcome to Midnight Hatter Live, the weekly variety show where we talk Gundam, gaming, and all types of other good stuff. Joining me, as always, is my excellent host, Adam Blue, and we have a special guest in-house with us today, AMAC from the Feddie Scum podcast. How you doing?
Hi, hey guys. Yeah, I'm doing pretty good. Had a very lazy morning, enjoying
Nice.
coffee and cat.
Coffee and cat, the two C's,
Yep,
I
Mhm.
guess.
that's a good win. I'll take it.
That's cool.
Well, it's been a while since we've had like a real like tabletop discussion here on the channel because, as you know, Adam and I tend to veer off into the video game realm a little more often than not, and there's always some Gundam news to talk about.
Yeah.
So, that said, if you missed last week's episode of the Gundam Explained show, AMAC joined us to talk about Gundam and his experience getting into Gundam. So, go check that out, like, after. Stay here now, hang out with us now, but then after. And if you have any questions about Feddie Scum or tabletop gaming that you want AMAC to answer, drop them in the chat, and I will keep an eye on it. I see we've
Yeah,
already
good
got
idea.
some people hanging out with us. Gundam Wing, Shirt Lad, Dan, Talos, and then this guy Gundam Explained. He's always lurking in the chat.
Who is that? Yeah.
But yeah, as always, links to Gundam Explained, everything down in the description below. And we've got links to Feddie Scum and AMAC's profiles down in there as well. Go check that out. So yeah, without further ado, I'd like to just dive kind of right into it if you guys are into that.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Always into diving in. Although, like on the shallow end, they say not to dive. So, do I just dip my toe in? I'm afraid.
I don't know. There's
Then
no lifeguard on duty, so we'll
Oh,
just
okay. We'll do whatever we want.
there you go. So yeah, AMAC, tell us, because we learned your history with Gundam and how you got into that last week, on the playground watching kids play play Gundam Wing. But how did you get into tabletop gaming and role playing in
mm,
particular?
like a lot of other people, it started with D&D with friends and barely playing D&D. Um, when you're a teenager, that's pretty much what it started as. We were all fans of Final Fantasy and those games, and so you know we kind of turned D&D in that direction. More high fantasy kind of the themes of Final Fantasy, and wanted to tell her our own little story. And then from there, I kind of discovered other games that suited my interests. Uh, Kind of the first one that I really latched onto was Vampire the Masquerade 20th Anniversary
Oh,
Edition,
very
um,
nice.
which I
Yeah.
still enjoy to this day quite a bit.
Yeah, I mean, all the like White Wolf stuff, that was very big when I was in high school. And
Hmm.
yeah, I think that your story kind of lines up with like how most people get into tabletop gaming. I think that, what do you think it is? Do you think it's just the notoriety of D&D that draws people in, or do you think that there's something inherent about the D20 system that makes it appealing to people?
I've seen people pick up other dice systems a bit easier than a D20 system, so I don't know if it's the D20 system that really has it. There's a little bit of an appeal now because of like the popularity of actual plays, Critical Role, things like that, and um, how much of a larger space D&D occupies in kind of the nerd culture, front of the mind kind of deal. Everyone knows what a D20 is. Everyone knows that a 20 is really good. Usually a one's really bad. And so I guess there could be some, surface level appeal there. But I think and honestly, a D10 system or a D6 system is usually easier for people to grasp onto immediately. Uh, and what people kind of have an attraction toward is not so much the system itself, but the idea of role play, especially nowadays.
Definitely. Yeah, I mean, I think that especially in the Gundam space, especially like in the Gundam tabletop space, I should say, is, people tend to be a little bit more into sort of crunchy numbers games with like lots of, and I think that that's where, a lot of tabletop miniature games, like miniature war
Yeah.
games kind of occupy that space a little bit more for Gundam fans um, than for, fantasy or what have you. Um, but yeah, so like you mentioned, you don't end up so like you don't actually end up playing a role-playing game the first time that you play a role-playing
Oh
game,
no,
right?
no, you are. It's something butchered. It's some abomination. It's not D&D. Whatever you're playing,
Yeah.
it's especially if it's also the DM's first time. It is
Yeah.
it is this weird abstracted idea of what a 13-year-old thinks D&D is. Pretty much is what you end up playing,
Yeah.
and that's people's most. That's usually your first experience.
My first time was actually, I don't know, late 20s or early 30s because I never really played it earlier. And it was actually with my band and some other people. Like they played, I
Hmm.
didn't play. And then they invited me to play. And they were already middle of a campaign. So I was like a new character, but it was interesting for me. It was difficult for me because they were treating me bad, but it was because I was an outsider. They were going along with the story. Like, who's this guy? And I thought they were just like messing with me. But they were actually really trying to stick to an idea for the story of the fact that, yeah, you're this new guy that just joined the group. We can't trust you yet.
Secretly,
And I
they
was
just
like,
they
wow.
didn't like you, and they were like,
Yeah, yeah.
we're gonna use this opportunity to role play bully this guy."
But I liked that, and it didn't really click for me until later, like, how deep, there's layers to it, because it's like, yeah, they wanted me to play, but they also had to they can't just, just give me a free pass, they really have
Yeah,
to go along with the story.
definitely.
Hmm.
Um, and I mean, so you coming from a video game space, and it sounds like AMAC, you kind of came from a video game space as well, since you were kind of
Oh,
leaning from Final Fantasy into tabletop
That's
role
interesting.
play.
yeah, I played. Well, look, I grew up in the South. My house was really far away from anyone else's. You you play video games. You don't you don't do social games as easily until you are able to be like, "Hey, mom, drive me to so and so's house," or
Exactly.
"Hey, drive me to the town square. We meet up and hang out there." Until you're old
Yeah.
enough to start doing things like that, it's your video games first. And so I had a hand-me-down SNES from my uncle, who is the reason why I'm into any nerdy things, generally
Oh,
speaking.
cool.
He got me into
Thank you.
40K, and he gave me a hand-me-down SNES with pretty much all the best games on that platform.
Oh, that's
That's the
cool.
best. You got
I
like a
was
curated experience.
I
It's
was
like,
so spoiled. If I only realized it then, I thought games were the best thing ever. I didn't realize how much trash is on the SNES as well. I only
oh,
got to play. I was like, oh man, everything's a hit on this console.
Well, it's crazy because back then too, it's like you only had like 2 games at a time sometimes or something, and it was like, "Wow, I'm just gonna play this game and figure it out and love it," and nowadays, there's so many games to play, it's easy to be like, "Yeah, I'm not gonna spend my time with that. I'm not gonna spend my time with that." But yeah, back then I remember playing, I think the first real RPG on SNES I played, I think it was called Soul Blazer. It was more actiony, like the Link to the Past.
Mhm.
Um, but it was just over time, there was just dialogue. That was the thing that kept me from RPGs was the dialogue. But
more talky
but it
bits.
yeah, but AMAC, you're saying that it was Final Fantasy, the games like on the Super Nintendo that got you
Mhm.
into like, what was it that transitioned the gaming side to the tabletop? Uh,
well, so when you're playing Final Fantasy, in my case specifically, it was Final Fantasy 3, which was not really 3, it was actually
right,
6. Whole story there about why that happened.
right.
So you're playing through that, and you're like, okay, well, what if this happened in the story? What if that happened in the story? And then that kind of freedom translates to a desire of, oh well, how do I kind of express this? How do I explore those different ideas in a fantasy
Mm.
setting? And that led to me kind of wanting to play D&D. I feel like with a lot of people, it either does that or it's leads to them writing fan fiction or their own universes. It leads to them writing a lot, things like that, or form role play, like play by post.
Yeah, so I did a lot of writing, but the other thing I did a lot was playing action figures. I would set them up, and this was even into like middle school. So I think I was still playing them when a lot of people weren't. But for me, that was kind of my escaping kind of role playing. I spent more time setting things up than
Hmm.
actually playing with them. Like I made the town, the world, the characters, and then I'd be okay, time to clean up. Yeah.
See, it sounds like HeroScape is the tabletop game for
Well,
you.
yeah, that's pretty interesting.
Spend
But
4 or
AMAC, were
5
you ever
hours
into the
making a
action
map
figures?
and then like, all right, I'm too tired to play.
So I had a set. I don't have them anymore, sadly. But I had a set of the battle damage G Gundam figures eventually.
Oh, sweet.
And then randomly, I went to a yard sale once at a church, and there was just a whole thing of like the original Mobile Suit Gundam action figures, and so I have a crap ton of those still in that closet back there.
Oh, that's cool.
Those are pretty
So
great figures, honestly.
they are. A lot of them still hold up. They're pretty good looking. And I have all the weapons in like a little Ziploc bag because they were all opened. Whoever put them at the yard sale had played with them, and then
Oh yeah.
Naturally.
Oh, that's cool.
Well, like you said, it's when you're kind of living in an isolated area and, it's kind of hard to get into like a social gaming setting, can you teach us the secret of how do you get a consistent group of players at a table to, well, in your case, like, audio only, but, how do you get a consistent group of players to show up week in and week out for the drudgery of a tabletop game?
So the hardest part of my job is scheduling and getting everyone to show up. I would say initially, though, it is a thing that is very hit and miss. Like in those early days of playing D&D in my friend's shed, um, it was very hit and miss if people would show up, who would show up, when we'd be able to do it. It was almost a once a month thing at times, if that. So a lot of sympathy there for people who have trouble finding groups and things like that. And I understand why, as an adult now who role plays a lot more. I used to, as a kid, I did not understand why you would ever role play with random people on the internet for tabletop games. I'd be like, I don't know you. I don't want to do this. But as an adult now, it's like, yeah, it's fucking tough. It's really tough.
Absolutely. I mean, and especially like, as a guy in my 30s, I've got a kid, I've got, bills to pay and stuff like that. I don't have time to get together with other people in their 30s who also have kids and bills to pay and stuff. It's tough to get that stuff online, but
really
you
tough.
run into those challenges playing with random people on the internet as well, where it's like you don't know where their comfort zones are and what you're allowed to do, what you can say and things like that. So there's always a
building in that
challenge there too.
like scheduling, it's like building in that new normal for you to be like, yeah, I'm going to spend an hour or two every day, a couple days with these random people, get to know them because you don't know. Yeah, like you were saying, Steven, you don't know how that's going to turn out. And that even reminds me, the early days, of the internet, or at least for me, was like it would be the AOL chat rooms, but they would have, and I loved it, but I didn't understand it. They would have role playing forums or something, and I didn't understand it, but it was like Star Wars. So it'd be like here's the role playing thing for pilots, but I didn't understand. Was it like, and you guys might know this, was it where people were just messaging back and forth like stories or something?
Yeah, it was most likely play by post.
Yeah.
So
Oh,
you would be expected. Well, for AOL, the turnaround's a bit quicker.
yeah.
It's more like modern play by post, where you post a few sentences, and then in a few minutes the person gets back with you. A few hours is the courtesy that you wait, for like a group of people. But that all comes from like forum culture, where your play by posting stuff would be like days. You would post several paragraphs of what describing your character's feelings and things that they do and your next few steps, and then you'd wait a day or two, and then someone else would respond.
That's pretty neat. And I think that's why I didn't get into that, because there wasn't an instant gratification I was getting from my Genesis or SNES. So I was like, well,
Yeah,
but I was
dopamine
intrigued,
faster.
though. Yeah, I know. I was intrigued, and I even was, I don't know what term I'm looking for, but I loved the fact that people were doing that and finding fun out of it. And I was like, man, that's neat. And that's kind of the same thing with tabletop, and why I haven't really done it as much. I feel like there's this, it's more of a mental long game gratification than it is a like instant, material.
Yeah, there's a bit of a barrier to entry there, and I mean, like it's interesting. When I was in high school, I actually was playing a play by post Gundam Wing role
Hmm.
playing game, and I was so obsessed with trying to come up with a combat system that would work, in a way that
For play by
harnessed.
post, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that's
Did you ever have any experience with that, AMAC?
The only combat systems I've ever seen work super well in play by post or that kind of forum RP are very simple drilled down ones where every test is effectively boiled down to one role, and then if you have a moderator or like a GM for that setting, they can kind of determine it, or it's just an agreement between players where you know I roll a D100, you roll a D100, whoever's higher gets their way in the scenario, kind
Honor
of stuff.
system.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
Um, so that tends to be most of it. In terms of my modern tools, just in case anyone was curious, I use a Discord bot called Sesh for scheduling. It translates everything to local day and time for individual users.
That's hugely
It'll
beneficial.
tell you who checked into the app and who was like, "Hey, I can make it. I can't make it." You can edit it afterwards after you make the event, things like that. So it's very useful for because Feddie Scum. Most of us are in the same time zone, but we have a Furin who's German, and like I don't want to do that math every damn time I have to schedule when he's available.
No, that's
Um,
brutal. And similarly, I've played with players, in the UK and in Europe that, it's like, oh, okay, so, and then you're trying to juggle with like other people's, so it's like, okay, I know I've got one player in the Midwest and one player in Germany, so then where do I line up that I can
mhm.
accommodate both of them? So yeah, that can be messy as well.
But Sesh is pretty good for that. There's also a few other like Discord apps I've seen for scheduling when you're available and when you can play a game. I feel like after that initial step of when you find a reoccurring time slot every week where you could play, after that it becomes a lot easier as long as no one made a mistake and forgot that they had something to do that day. And like with Feddie Scum, we occasionally have to reschedule because of some conflict, but uh, every other week pretty much is our recording schedule, and we're pretty decent about it. It used to be any day of the week, but right now it's like only Fridays and Saturdays that we can record, so it's pretty tight. And so we're trying to move to a recording every weekend kind of deal.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, and of course, being a recorded show gives you that flexibility that you don't have to, show up live on a, you know,
oh yeah, at a specific time, yeah. If we have to push it 15 minutes, we can push it 15 minutes. If we have to
that's
push
great.
it the next day, we can push it to the next day. Yeah, I don't think we could have done the show live by any means in terms of
It's
just scheduling alone because
it's
they're
harder than people than people think. They watch, guys like Glass Cannon or Critical Role, and they're like, oh yeah, we can totally
oh,
do this. It's
just show up and play
just
a
show
game.
up.
Yeah.
Well, so on the topic of Fetty Scum, what was the sort of design philosophy and inspiration behind your system, Operation V?
So initially, it's went through some iterations because, of course, it has. What homebrew system hasn't went through 8 different
Iterations?
versions?
No, I don't know anything about that.
So initially, it was very inspired by Powered by the Apocalypse, and it had now. If you're familiar with Powered by the Apocalypse, you don't have classes really. You have archetypes that you kind of choose, and these archetypes are based on like the genre of the setting that you're playing. And so, if you're playing you know a detective game, for instance, you might have the suspect, the beat cop, the detective, the rival detective, the chief. Things that are archetypes to those kinds of genres, and they have rules and moves and different means of operating themselves. So, in other words, you end up playing that archetype because that's the only way you play that class. And that's kind of the whole design philosophy design philosophy behind Powered by the Apocalypse. So I wanted to do something similar for Gundam. And so I made this little tree of archetypes where you would potentially start out as a rookie, and then over time you choose which playbook you're moving to, and you move from one playbook to another and work your way down into being like grizzled veteran and things like that, or like new type monstrosity. uh, So that was kind of the initial idea, and that's what I used for most of season 1, if not all of it. I kind of stopped using it near the end, but I didn't have something to replace it. And that's because I came up with an issue, and after some investigating, I figured out that this is kind of a common issue with Powered by the Apocalypse games. Now, a common issue that people immediately notice is Powered by the Apocalypse games are not crunchy at all, and so if you're there for crunch, you're not getting what you wanted. They're very narrative based. But there is a problem that I noticed with the narrative based thing, which is you're kind of static. Even if you're moving from playbook to playbook, it's kind of static. And now what your character isn't just a thing that you define, it's in the rules. What your character is how your character operates. Like everything about their character is mechanically represented. And that sounds nice at first. And for new players who aren't used to role playing, and players who are like, if you're doing a one shot, that's fucking perfect. Hop right in. Hey, I know how to play this character. I'm
Yeah.
the ace detective. I can behave like an ace detective, and everything on this sheet is going to help me behave and play like an ace detective. But for a long running campaign or a long running series, this doesn't work. It falls apart. It starts falling because you're more than just that archetype. Any character worth their salt is more than just that archetype. And so things start not gelling that well. You want to change, but you don't want to change in a way that was planned. You want to develop the character, but not in a way that it's planned. Now, there are a few Powered by the Apocalypse systems that try to address this. You have like positive and negative movement, almost like a positive and negative level, almost in some. There are partial playbook adoption systems, but and I toyed with using those, but none of them really made me happy. And so I kind of came to the conclusion that I wanted to leave the character and role play stuff to entirely on the player side and not really represent it mechanically. While that's nice, like I said, in a one-shot setting or for new players new to role play, it's fine. But in a long-running campaign where you wanted characters to live and breathe like players to live and breathe their characters and really get into the role play, it gets in the way. And so I moved away from that.
I think you brought up a very good point. I mean, like you said, a class-based system versus, say, like a skill-based system is always going to be more appealing to a new player because they're going to be kind of told how they are supposed to behave and what role
Mhm.
they play. Even if there's a moderate amount of crunch to the system, it's like, I know that I'm the DPS guy, or I'm the tank, or I'm the healer. I think that, like you said, having a more open-ended skills-based system where maybe your character growth is determined by the actions that the characters actually take, that is something that I think veteran role players would appreciate more.
Yeah, and so currently and for a while in Operation V, that's kind of what I've done. I've kind of stole it from Call of Cthulhu, where you can only really level up skills that you've used, and you get to test them at the end of the session to determine whether or not you increase them or not. And that's a pretty good, pretty good level up system,
Yeah.
improvement system, in my opinion. Because if you don't use a skill, you will not be improving at it. It's just that simple.
Yeah.
I think to close out what I wanted to talk about the archetype thing, I want to bring up the Burning Wheel.
Ooh.
All right, so the Burning Wheel is almost the pinnacle. It's the end game of that kind of narrative role play.
It's a
So
beautiful tome as well.
oh yeah,
That
yeah.
is.
Hold on, let me find some art in here. This is a great book, and it's a very interesting system. If you are interested in getting it, I recommend it. Um, I think you can just Google it and probably buy it from my
So that
website.
is that book just literally a like expanded rule?
It's
For
yeah, it's just a rule book, pretty much the whole thing. There's no lore in here really.
yeah.
It's well, it's like 80% rule book, and then there's like 20% the writer going on little tangents and diatribes, which are very entertaining. So
Huh.
I don't mind it. But some people didn't like it. But anyways, so this is kind of like the pinnacle of that kind of game design, where you are very much driven narratively. by the character archetype that you want to play. Now, it's a little bit more free flowing because you don't choose an archetype, you get to choose your character's beliefs, and that kind of affects your character's progression. But it comes into the problem that I had with Powered by the Apocalypse. And it was only kind of when I got this that I kind of really realized that, like, oh, that's the issue. Uh, because, like, I shouldn't have an issue with this. I enjoy a lot of this, but, like, while mechanically representing narrative stuff sounds very fun, it in a long term gets in the way more often than not.
Yeah. I
And
mean, a
so I
lot
don't
of
want to.
ideas sound great on paper.
Yeah, I don't want to hate. I don't want to hate on this. I love this fucking book. I love this system, but yeah, it made me come to that conclusion. And so I've been moving away from that, keeping it more, trying to keep it a little bit more simplified and keep mechanics being the only thing that kind of is represented. So just straight up and down character stuff. Um,
Definitely. Well, so that brings up a good point. So, like,
mhm.
on the new Patreon exclusive series that Dead Set Media is running right now, you've been sampling a lot of new systems, new games, and things like that. Have you come
Stress
across
test, right?
what's that?
RPG stress test.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay.
So you know, is there a system that you've sampled that you enjoy the most, and why would that be?
Um, recently, the one that I enjoyed the most was called Unincorporated. I'd have to look it up to figure out who made it. But Unincorporated is basically you and whoever else is playing the game. It's GM-less, pretty much. It's just cooperative.
Interesting.
You There's a few different tables for you to roll on, a few different guide things to create. But effectively, you create a Twin Peaks like town that has its own just drama and weird stuff going on in it. People murdering other people, and just you go and take turns, kind of fleshing out the town. It's kind of more of a setting game where you use it to create a setting for a different game. At least that's how I've seen people recommend it using it. It's how we use it in stress tests. We're about to release those episodes now, actually. But
Awesome.
Unincorporated it was very fun. It was very fun sitting around gossiping about a fictional town. Turns out.
Oh.
Yeah, I mean that kind of sounds reminiscent of like a drink and draw type scenario where you're like kind of passing around this, you know, I don't know, it's kind of like an oral tradition type deal. You're passing around the totem pole, and
Hmm.
each person kind of gets to add in their own sort of narrative flavor. So I appreciate that as a concept for a game.
Hmm.
Like you said, it's probably not going to scratch the itch of somebody who's looking to play like a D&D game, but I think that
Oh no.
like you said, it's a good one to have a few beers over.
In terms of more traditional dungeon delving, Stoneburner. Stoneburner. We recently released episodes for Stoneburner. It's you play as dwarves mining in space, and you build like your little base. You're trying to create a community. You delve into a randomly generated dungeon and fight monsters there. The combat was it felt a very comfortable amount of crunchy.
Okay.
It had good depth to it. It had a lot of interesting, fun things that you could kind of twist and spin in terms of having different. I can't sure what they're called. I think they're just different attributes that if you worked it into how you were attacking or acting, it would give you advantage. Things like that. Yeah, it also had like a very fun initiative system where you kind of pass the baton between players and NPCs back and forth. Everyone has to go for the turn to be over, but you can kind of just play, keep away for a bit from the enemies if you feel that that benefits you.
Pretty
Um,
cool.
mhm.
Interesting. Now, and like you said, for stress tests, you guys kind of go out of your way to abuse the system and see what you can do to kind of break it, right?
Mostly we're just idiots, and so that comes naturally. We're we're
That's
not we're not reverse engineering these games. We are just hey, would this game survive first contact with the enemy? And if the enemy's four idiots who are two beers deep.
and you know what? Honestly, that's probably I would say the baseline of most role playing games. Is it's like it needs to be able to hit that mark. Otherwise, you're gonna get experiences of people saying like, "Well, I just can't stand tabletop role playing."
Mhm. Exactly, exactly. And so yeah, that's our own personal standard. I don't, it's worth a little bit. That's you know, two beers deep and just a group of idiots is most parties playing games. So, eh, you know, I feel like it's an okay standard to test things by.
See that you've described the perfect focus group that I think if Wizards really wants to go forward with D&D 1 or whatever they're calling this new
Hmm.
6e, get get four idiots just a little buzzed. And if they can read the rules then you're good to go.
Perfect. You're working as intended.
And any other systems that you would say like get an honorable mention?
So in terms of Feddie Scum, I've collected them here actually. So uh, Feddie Scum, you have like these core attributes, similar to a lot of different games, but they're kind of they're not worded like strength. They're worded like grit and wrath, vaguer terms that can be applied kind of in different ways, more generously. And you have skills. So skills would be like acrobatics, athletics, firearms, melee, things like that.
Yeah.
And so generally, how it works is it's proscripted. So the player says what they want to do. I want to run over there and punch him in the face. I'm angry. All right, that's wrath and melee. Wrath or brawl. If you're, oh, and I'm gonna run over there and punch him in the face, but I'm very calm, cool, and collected about it. All right, that might be grit. All right. So the vibe is what the core tribute I go with, and so that is kind of how that's set up. And I got that idea of kind of the player describing what they want to do, and then the GM kind of prescribing what the role then requires from Vampire the Masquerade. So Vampire the Masquerade, you have a lot more specific attributes and specific skills, but ultimately you describe to me what you want to do, and I will tell you, unless it's mentioned in the rules specifically, I will tell you what you roll with based on how you described it. Things like that. So I twisted that to be a little bit more flavorful. So that's one thing that I borrow a lot from, just because it's a favorite system of mine. Um,
Yeah.
that's in terms of honorable mentions, though. Morkborg. If you have not played Morkborg, go play Morkborg. Morkborg's very fun.
Yes. And
Morkborg is incredibly rules light, incredibly simple.
it is a very beautiful book too.
It
If you
is.
guys
It
have
is.
not seen this, it's the illustration, everything about it is like a work of art. And I think I might have said this before on either this show or on Gundam Explained, but like big fan of
Oh,
the
that's
idea
cool.
that the medium is the message, and Morkborg, the book itself, will make you feel the way that you're supposed to feel while you are while
Oh,
you're
that
playing
is
the
cool.
game.
It's I always joke and say that it is one of the prettiest art books I own.
That makes me think if there is, and there could be, an Evil Dead game like this, it would be a Necronomicon for sure.
Oh,
Oh,
definitely.
absolutely. And
And so,
I
like,
mean,
for those of you guys in the audience who are not familiar with Morkborg, can tell us about the system and what it's designed to play?
it's very rules light. It's very easy to roll up a character almost immediately. There's apps that can even make it instantaneous, where you just on your phone can hit create a character, and that's because you can die incredibly quickly. It's a very gruesome,
Oh,
bloody game. It's very roguelike. It is. It's kind of horror, dark fantasy, I guess, is how it would be described. I'm sure they have a descriptor in here. But there's a lot of supplements for it, and there's a lot of fan content for it that'll turn it into anything you want it to be. Almost, it's very adaptable, very easy to adapt, very easy to play too, which is very important. Um,
hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I think that an Evil Dead system or an Evil Dead supplement to Morkborg would be very easy to work with.
I would
Pretty
be
neat.
surprised if it doesn't already exist.
Yeah, for sure.
Oh,
um, there's also a kind of an official one called Cyborg, which is a cyberpunk variant of this. So if you want everything I just said, but in a cyberpunk package, there you go. Highly recommend that as well.
Either it's so funny because you'll get people kind of uh, people on the internet saying silly things. No, I've never heard of anything like that. People on the internet saying like, "Hey, I want to make a role-playing system for like this franchise, or I want to make a role-playing system, that's based around this. And it's like, man, if you did like just 30 seconds more Googling, you probably find that probably it exists. It's
Or something close enough, honestly.
yeah, good enough for
Like,
government work.
about months before I started Feddie Scum, I was trying out different systems that were mecha tabletop or mecha role playing.
Yeah.
Um, Gundam 5e, I don't think existed at the time, so
Mm.
I don't think I bumped into it.
No,
But
no.
you know, Mechton Zeta came up.
Yep. Yep.
I probably would enjoy playing it as a war game. I over voice with no visual representation. Can't recommend. Uh,
Yeah.
bit too crunchy for my taste in that affair.
Yeah. And I
Um,
would say the same about like BattleTech, A Time of War, like the role-playing expansion for BattleTech is a little crunchy for Gundam, especially like you said, if you're trying to kind of capture more of the role-playing narrative-driven aspect. It's great as like a combat system.
mhm. And so that was a problem that I was running into is I needed something that would record well and be an entertaining episode. And so it needed to be narrative focused and it couldn't be too crunchy. And the problem that I was coming into is because mecha kind of touches on hard sci-fi in a lot of things, every system that kind of goes for that tends to be hard sci-fi. A runner for was it like a runner up was it for it was like Lancer, but I was like, man, I'd have to make all of these mobile suits in work in Lancer, and that's going to be really tough. And the character stuff wasn't really there. I don't know if you've ever played Lancer, but the character stuff is very, very, very bare minimum because it's mostly about you building your mech and stuff and customizing
Yeah.
your mech. And that was another thing is like in Gundam, it's rarely ever about customizing your mobile suit. You kind of just get it from the Earth Federation and then you use it to kill Zeeks. Uh,
Pretty much. Yeah, I would say that.
there's some, you get a mid-season upgrade, but that's about the extent of that. And so that kind of progression doesn't quite exist in Gundam in that way. And so I felt it would be a little bit out of place for it to be focusing on that. And so I didn't think Lancer was a good pick for it.
Yeah, yeah. Or another one that gets recommended to me often is Jovian Chronicles, which is
Hmm.
basically like, if Mechton Zeta is,
Yeah,
kind of a knockoff Gundam, then Jovian Chronicles is right up there with knockoff Gundam.
yeah, yeah,
Like we
absolutely,
really
yeah.
wanted to make a Gundam RPG, but we couldn't use the
Couldn't get
IP,
the
so we
rights. Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, is similarly, yeah. But that was the problem I was coming up with is all these games that most of them that existed came out of the 80s and early 90s and were way too crunchy for, podcasting actual play stuff.
yeah,
Um,
that would not make an entertaining show if it was like, all right, hold on, let me roll on the mishap table. Okay, my ammo exploded. I need to roll on the ammo explosion table. All right, well, I had a it's just like,
oh wait, I burned a lot of fuel pushing, so that changes the weight of my vehicle. So that means I turn at a different delta V. Let me calculate that out real quickly.
right. Let me bust out the
Um,
quadratic equation here and yeah.
and like in a hard sci-fi game with everyone being like into that, that's great.
I mean, I can attest. It is a lot of fun to play a game like that. But like you said, for streaming purposes, I mean,
No.
especially for playing, voice only, that
Hmm.
it just doesn't work. And I think I had a similar experience with Gundam 5e. Is it's like I tried to minimize as much of that crunch as I could, to make it feel, everything's a little bit more flavor based and then of course what's interesting is like you said, iterations. My big V2 update was like, you know what? People aren't really going for the thing that I made, so I'm just gonna make it reskinned D&D and we'll call it good.
The good thing about Feddie Scum is it's its own test bed, basically. And so I can see I'll add a feature and are my players engaging with it? Are they using it? When I bring it up, do they sound like they want to use it? Are they like, oh yeah, and then they use it? Or are they like, I don't care about that. Why would I care about that?
It's always
Um,
interesting when you discover something that it's like you are very passionate about and like, oh, I feel like this game really needs this, and then you show it to someone and they could care less.
oh, and they're like, "Oh, that's just in the way." Yeah.
Um, but yeah, we've actually had some good chat here going on. I need to
Okay.
show some love to Matt and Dan, who they both recommend Xena. Well, Matt in particular, hey Mac, you need to play Xenogears.
Mhm. Okay.
um, and Dan saying that most skill-based systems turn into de facto class-based systems in actual play. Would you say that that's
Over time, yeah, you
yeah,
you kind of work your way into filling a role. But I would say what's a good word for it? The experience of getting there is different.
yeah,
As opposed to being on a guided path from there and knowing what you want to be and kind of working your way uh, through your whatever level scale you have for whatever game you have, and then arriving at your destination of you being max level at that class. You kind of skill base your way until you're basically a class at the end of it, but you can
yeah.
still the path's going to be different. It's gonna, instead of like looking like that, it's going to be
And
maybe I thought I wanted to be an engineer, and then
exactly.
the explorer died, and I had to become the face of my traveler party.
Yeah, well, and that's, I'm sure that as the forever GM, you are always annoyed when a player comes to you with their backstory, and it's like,
Oh
well, I don't even
God.
have a like, what adventure can I give you that you haven't been on?
So Operation V, I because that is a particular small pet peeve of mine. Either that or the exact opposite of, oh, I'll just fill out my character.
Wing it.
We're just wing it. I'm more comfortable with winging it if I know who it is. Like if it's like Dallas or Zach or Kat, or, any of the Feddie Scum crew coming to me and being like, "Yeah, I'm just gonna wing my character." I'd be like, "All right, you're competent. Like you're figure it out." I trust them enough. But for a new player, I would be like, no, give me something, give me at least an archetype, a
Yeah,
descriptive text, a flavor, something.
there you go.
But I have a tool that I've included in Operation V. I call it the 3-step characterization. I use this for NPCs all the time. This is a weird little trick that I picked up from a few different things, namely
Okay.
a book called Story by McKee. It's a book on how to write screenplays.
Mm,
And also just a small excerpt about how Tolkien fleshed out the backstory of his world, combining elements of these two. It's real
okay.
simple. And basically, at the end of the process, you will have 3 meaningful paragraphs of backstory for your character. I've been meaning to do a video about this for years. I've never done it. So what you start out with, the base premise is Tolkien reportedly said to start your story 3 steps away from its actual beginning. So you have your forging of the ring. Well, it doesn't start with that. We don't start with the forging of the one ring or anything like that. We start several steps away from that. Now, he said 3 because it's more than that. The cause and effect tends to get blurry, and while in real life, cause and effect is nebulous at best when pointing at events and things. In fiction, you want clear cause and effect. It's what
Definitely.
makes things make sense.
Yeah. I
So
crave it.
3 things in the past of your character. So something that's early. So normally for your average character, who's probably just statistically speaking, in mid 20s when you roll them up, probably for whatever game you're playing. That tends to be the case. Mid 20s, 30s. Um, Fairly competent individuals, but still kind of at the beginning of their big adventure, ideally. Um, so these 3 past events would kind of correspond with like an early childhood, maybe teenage, and then maybe fairly recent. Okay. And so these would be events that kind of define the past of your character in some meaningful way. What did they take from these past events that occurred to them, and how does that work into their characterization? And so you can think of it kind of as just picking out character traits. So, are they aggressive? Are they stubborn? Think of it like that. So pick out
Okay.
3 traits that you want your character to be, okay? And now think of, well, why are they like that? Give me one paragraph in their past as to why they're like that.
Mm.
And these drives also can be kind of on different levels too. Not always, but it's fun to do it like this, where you have the most recent desire is very obvious. It's outwardly stated. If you ask the character, what is your goal? They will say, "Oh, money. Money's my goal. My
I
goal
seek
is
the grail.
money." Um, and then the a level back is like their conscious goal, but they wouldn't tell anybody, but they know it themselves. Okay,
Okay.
your conscious goal, and so go back to like their teenage years, and it's not that they wanted money, it's that they wanted success. They wanted success. Now later on, they've equated success to money. All right, but
Mm.
deep down, they know they just want success. They don't actually want money. All right. And then you can go a layer deeper into their childhood. And you can be like, they had parents that, ignored them. They want love. They want attention. And when they got attention, it came from successes that they had.
I
So,
love this.
see how there's layers to it. So now you have a decently layered character that has a hierarchy of wants that can break down or develop over time. And you have 3 paragraphs of past events that correspond directly to those motivations.
Perfect. And the best part I think about that is that it's not limiting either. It's like these are just 3 aspects of their character. You can always
Hmm.
add and flesh out
Oh
things
yeah,
more. So you're not like kind of bottlenecked. It just gives you a good starting point.
all that you've really nailed down is that your character is had a lonely childhood, wants success because that's the only attention they got, and then eventually equated success to making money. And so those are very basic things that you can branch out from quite a bit because it doesn't go into how they get success, how they get money. Are they a card shark? Are they a scam artist? Are they trying to be a doctor? Are all of these things. And so this is also a trick I use for NPCs all the time, nailing down
Mm.
these 3 past events, and it's just
Yeah. GM toolkit right there.
get them out there real
Mm.
quickly. Um, Another small trick is 2-dimensional traits are good. All right, you hear 2-dimensional thrown around as an insult all the time.
Yeah.
It's an
But
insult to
that's
real people, but like
it is.
characters,
No, to characters, it's perfectly fine.
it's
You
awesome.
want your traits to be 2-dimensional. And what I mean by this is if I say a character is aggressive, that's 1 dimension. That's a 1-dimensional trait. Now, most people wouldn't think that. Most people would be like, yeah, a singular trait of mine could be aggressive. Um, but no, that's actually bad. You want it to be 2-dimensional. You want to add another thing to that. So they are aggressive, except for when blank. Fill that in. The exception tells me way more about your character than
Mm.
that the fact that they're aggressive. Their
Yeah.
aggressive is a role play direction,
Yeah.
but what tells me who they are is when they aren't aggressive. What exceptions they make for those things.
That's a good like, see, you need to have these like written out as like a formula, which
Yeah.
so Frep and Matt in the chat are saying that are we at the point where we can bully Adam for the Operation V rules yet?
That's what Feddie Scum's been doing. Everyone in the Feddie Scum Discord has been doing that constantly since day 1.
Give.
I will do a video at some point, like I've been saying for a while, on these little tips in a more fleshed out manner, separate from the rules. I wanted to include them in the rules because I feel like
They're
every
helpful.
rule book now, it has a section. Every rule book now has a section where they're like, "What is role playing?" And
Oh yeah.
I read them all. I always read them. I'm trying to find it here in this one right here. But they always have a "What is role playing?" and I read it thinking like, man, I'm really wanting one of these sections to be good one day. To actually
There you
give
go.
the players something tangible and concrete to work with. When I have no idea what role playing is. I have no idea how to play a character. I've only consumed media. I've never created media. What advice can I be given to prepare me to play a character, the first character I've ever played. None of these books in their first section prepare you for that.
Well, see, that's where I'm looking at chat again, and Dan Vince says that this is a perfect one line to start your players off. Tell your players to roll a nice 19-year-old with low ASVAB scores and a love interest to impress. That is.
I guess this does bring me up to my preferred character creation method that we can
Please
chat
say
about
life
a little
path.
bit.
Please say
very
life
quick.
path.
Life path! Life path! Yeah!
Okay.
Feddie Scum episode 0 is actually us using the life paths for Mechton Zeta.
That's so awesome. Yeah. That's exactly what I was going to ask you, is like, what do you think of the life path system? What do you think of things like
Love the
Twilight
life path
2000?
system. It's great.
So, for those in the chat who I'm pretty sure that, everyone who's watching now is pretty familiar with it, but in case they're not, describe to us the life path system and how it works.
So you start with usually like the traveler version of life path, which is like the first version of life path, I'm
My
pretty
personal
sure.
favorite.
It's really good. You start as a graduate from high school, and you get to kind of go from there. Do you enlist in the military? Do you like join a private sector job? Do you go to
choose to go to
university?
college? Yeah.
Yeah, do you go to college and kind of prepare yourself for?
It's a lot like the Life board game.
I was
Yeah,
just about to say.
It is. It
I've
is.
been
It
playing
is.
that
And,
recently.
and including like the Life board game, its objective is to get you into substantial amounts of debt, and you might lose a limb.
Yeah,
But
you might even die in creating a character, which is kind of cool. I mean, it makes creating a character a game in and of itself, which I think is appealing.
mhm. A lot of people use you can die in character creation as a bit of a turnoff, but it's like, no GM's gonna be like, oh yeah, start over from the beginning. No, it's like, no, go back and just make a different choice, idiot. It's no one's going to make you actually start over from the beginning of
Yeah.
character creation, unless you really wanted to, I guess.
I mean, I guess it depends. Like, if you have just like chosen like 4 careers back to back that you wash out, get kicked out of the military,
Yeah.
you lost an arm,
I mean,
lost
it
an
might just
eye,
be better
like,
to be like,
think
all
I'm
right,
okay
I'm
dying.
dead. I'm dead. I'll start over, a new character. But yeah, the Travelers one, specifically the Mongoose Second Edition Traveler system, is very good.
Yes.
And its life path system basically allows you to slowly gain experience up until, I guess, whenever you want to stop. Hypothetically, you're supposed to stop around like 40 at a maximum ish.
Yeah.
But you can stop earlier than that, and probably have less issues and less debt, but you'd be a less skilled individual. And then near the end of the process, the longer you go, you're going to obviously be older. Age will start affecting you. You will be probably substantially more in debt.
Your physical
which debt,
stats start dropping off, and they
yeah,
drop
which
off
is
quick.
oh yeah, You start going over 50, 60. Woo! That's rough for that system. That system, you do not have health. It is just your stats. When you take damage, you remove that damage from your stats. Immediate death spiral.
Yeah.
It is not a system to take combat lightly.
Yeah, and I mean, that was honestly where I was like, man, this would be a perfect system for Gundam, would be used just Traveler, like the Mongoose Traveler, and I was like, as much as I want to do this, I'm trying to make a game that's more accessible to people. Might be a little cruel.
And 5e is probably the best. Like, it's the most accessible game out there in terms of what people know and what people want to play.
Yeah.
And that's mostly, like, there's a lot of talk in terms of accessibility, in terms of like dice. You hear it brought up where it's like, oh, do d6 because they're the most common dice that people will just have laying around. They won't have to go buy a special set of dice or anything like that. But more importantly, it's what people know.
Yeah.
People know D&D 5e.
Yeah,
Hate it or love it, people know it.
Exactly. That's kind of the motivation behind that, is it's like, are there better systems out there? Obviously. There's way more fun systems out there. Hopefully, Gundam can, tease the waters and bring more people into the dice rolling community. I said the C word. You guys know how much I hate communities, but bring it into the hobby. Let's put it that way. So yeah, I mean, I think that there's room for all kinds of different interpretations, I would say.
Absolutely, yeah.
And so would you say that like your goal with Operation V is simply to entertain via Feddie Scum, or is there any motivation there that's you're trying to kind of create an appeal, an awareness? What's the trying to get at the heart of AMAC here?
It is it's not deeply motivated. It, you know, those 3 paragraphs. This is nowhere near that. This is I needed to make a system for my actual play podcast, and so I have. That is as simple as it is. And
Utility is
I realized that like midway through kind of season 1 that the system that I want to make and the system that's good for podcasting are 2 different systems.
yes.
And I'm not going to be able to marry the differences between the 2 of them that well. But also the system that people want to play isn't the system that I want to make. It's the system that they hear me playing on Feddie Scum. It's the podcast system. They
Yeah.
want to play sessions that are as engaging and entertaining at the table as what they hear on the podcast. And I think that's what a lot of people are driven to D&D for, from like Critical Role and the Adventure Zone and stuff like that.
Yep.
And I feel like a lot of people who, you know, are into Gundam, listen to Feddie Scum, never role played before, they will want to reproduce the episodes. And I do have bad news. That system does not carry that weight. You're going to have to learn how to improv.
Yeah, I mean, I think that 90% of that, and you know, people will listen to podcasts and actual plays, and you know, they think like, oh, well, if I just had like that book, there's like a secret book that is making this so entertaining. And it's like, no, it's the people, and that's, you know, for better or worse, it's a good or bad thing. I think that it's just finding your people to play with. You know, I think that anyone can have as much fun as the 4 of you do, you know, with any game. They just have to all agree that that's the game that they want to play.
Oh, absolutely. I despise Pathfinder. I do not enjoy that system in the slightest. And I played a year-long campaign that was one of my favorites in that system. It's all
See?
about who you play with.
Yeah, all about the people. Well, we are coming up on the end of the hour. This has been such a fun conversation. I feel bad. Like Adam's like, man, these guys, when are they gonna stop talking about dice?
Hey, this was a learning experience. This was a journey for me. It actually connected some dots for me when it comes to this whole thing.
Well, and as you
So,
guys know, I'm trying to like, you know, tease the role playing out of Adam. So this is part of my part of my grand
working.
strategy.
I'm surrounded by it. It's working.
Yeah, you better just own up to it at this point. But yeah, before we sign off for the day, again, thank you so much for joining, AMAC. This has been
No problem. No
a
problem.
personal yeah, just call it a milestone in my podcasting career. But yeah, like I said, everyone check out his links down below in the description.
Thank you,
Is there anything that you wanted, any closing thoughts you wanted to leave us with before we say adieu?
Hmm. 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 Listen to Feddie Scum if you haven't. Give it a chance. And
Yeah.
RPG Stress Test if you're not a Gundam fan. But I imagine if you're here, you're probably a Gundam fan.
Yeah, we drop colonies. We do a little trolling. But yeah, well, thank you so much again for joining us, and Adam, thank you for co-hosting. Thank you for keeping an
Of
eye
course.
on the chat for me. And yeah, again, go check out our show from last week. Go check out Gundam Explained and Feddie Scum. Links down in the description below. We will have some new videos from Midnight Hatter here soon. Sorry for the content drought, but we'll clean that up. And of course, Gundam Explained show tomorrow. Tune in for that. 11 Central, noon Eastern. Till then, we will catch you all later.
Nice to see you.
Bye.